So I'll just start by introducing myself briefly, and I'll introduce our awesome guest speaker. We're so glad to have Judy North here. But just to introduce myself quickly, so hello everyone, I'm Day Cooper Hagel, and I am the Director of Mental Health Wilderness First Aid. And we run mental health first aid programs that are designed to offer mental health skills to folks, particularly folks who work, live, or play out in backcountry or remote areas or remote communities. So that's the kind of love and joy of my life. We run programs all the time. We also host these free guest speaker events, and we do different outreach groups and that kind of thing. So wonderful to have you all here. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday evening to offer up a bit of your evening on an important and serious topic, but one that I know that Judy is quite skilled at navigating gracefully. So glad to have you here, Judy. I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping type things first before we get going. Oh, my view is popping around here. Come back, view. Okay, there you all are. So I'll just offer a couple of housekeeping type things. First of all, I'll acknowledge that when we gather together to talk about serious issues, and especially a serious issue like suicide, all of us have some kind of journey or probably personal experience in our own lives supporting friends or family, or perhaps even someone that we've lost. And so I'll just acknowledge that, all of those folks might be on our hearts and minds as we navigate this tonight, and I want to honor and kind of hold that space for them as well. On a housekeeping note, we will invite you to make use of the chat for this talk tonight. So Judy will be kind of clicking through some slides and giving us her thoughts and inviting us to share different things as we go along. And Judy has said that she's very interested in having your thoughts as we go along as well. So we'll have a little bit more dedicated time for questions and answers toward the end of the presentation, but also she is very welcoming to any questions or comments that happen throughout. And so the best way for you to do that for tonight is to open up your chat, your Zoom chat, and type them into the chat. Now, Judy may not see them right away, but Sean and myself are going to be providing kind of background support here for tonight. And so we'll monitor the chat, and we may respond in the chat, or we may draw Judy's attention to the question as we go along as well. And just to introduce Sean really quickly as well. So Sean J is our meditation and mindfulness coordinator. He is a professional meditation and mindfulness coach, which is pretty great. We're blessed to have him on the team. And he also provides administration and social media consultation for mental health wilderness first aid. So tonight, Sean is here in kind of like a tech support, behind the scenes kind of guy. You're welcome to chat with either him or myself individually if you would like more of a one-on-one conversation. But certainly you can also share chats to the entire group as well. Let's see, what else have I left off here? Oh yes, as you will have been notified when you popped in, we are recording this. So generally with the guest speaker talks, I do like to edit them and have little snippets that go up on our social media. Sometimes we post the full video on our YouTube page or on our blog. And so we may have that as an offering. And I will say with that we also want everyone to feel free to speak freely and openly and ask questions. And so I'd like to invite everyone, if at any point afterward, well, at a quick point afterward, because you'd have to let us know before we post anything, but within the next day or two, if you think back on, oh, I asked that question and it came out kind of clumsy, or, maybe I wish I wouldn't have said it that way, please just shoot us an email and say, hey, could you please, take out my comment before you post this publicly, and we'll be happy to provide that service to you. So, and the same goes for you, Judy. If you feel like there's anything that you'd like us to skip over before we publish publicly, then we'll do that as well.
So I can just send you an email and say, delete everything I said. Mute me throughout.
Yeah. It'll just be like a picture of you the whole time. I will also say that we do have resources that I've sent out in all of the emails and also up on the webpage for this. So we have students from a wide variety of areas across North America, and even, in different continents sometimes. So I have tried to put up links that will assist you in finding the resources within your area by province or by state. So those resources are available, and I'm happy to drop them again in the chat just so everyone does feel supported as we talk about this important issue. So I think, Judy, I'll just say a few words about how we know each other, and then I'll pass it over to you.
Sounds good.
And actually, I'll invite everyone as I'm introducing Judy to just feel invited, please. You can keep your video on or off. This is not a class. It is kind of nice to see all your faces, so that's great. But please do feel invited to drop in the chat at least. Who are you, where you're from, and any kind of anything you want to share at this point. It's nice to have a lens on who's here, what your role is, etc. So I won't make this too formal, but I will say that Judy and I met when we both worked for the New Channel Tribal Council, which is a collection of New Channel First Nations out along the west coast of what's now known as Vancouver Island. And so I have some of my earliest memories with Judy are sitting in a pickup truck together on a long ride down a gravel road, bumping along when I was pregnant. Down to a remote community near Zibalis called Hattis. It was a Hattis Nation that we were hanging out in, and we would spend a few days out there serving and offering our services to the community and to the nation. And then we would travel on a long bumpy road back down back home again on a Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. So those are some of my earliest memories with Judy, and I've always been struck at Judy's real ability to hold space for very difficult conversations. Judy excels in crisis work and excels in supporting individuals and communities going through very difficult times. And I've always been struck, Judy, by your ability to do that in such an open-hearted way that that really holds space in a good way. So thank you for modeling that for me personally in my personal life, and also as a clinician. I've tried to kind of emphasize that in my work as well.
Thank you.
I'll briefly read Judy's little bio that we have up here on the website. So this is Suicide Intervention Training, Hope for Remote Areas. A brief overview. It is pretty brief. A past suicide attempt survivor herself, Judy North has incorporated her master's in counseling and psychology with 25 years of crisis intervention as a crisis intervention worker to provide empathic, holistic, compassionate, practical, and life-sustaining suicide and crisis intervention and postvention support. She has recently worked as a Livingworks applied suicide intervention skills training facilitator and as a consultant and crisis response expert for remote area communities along the west coast of Vancouver Island. Her clinical positions have included assisting children, youth, families, Aboriginal and remote communities in BC, Alberta, and Ontario. Judy offers private consultation and training regarding suicide intervention and postvention and critical incident stress debriefings.
Thank you.
All right, Judy, I think that's it. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. So you all know my name. I've been reading a little bit of the chat. First off, shout out to whoever it was that's from Chilliwack. I will say that was where I grew up throughout my life. So, or at least as a kid. So that's pretty exciting. So I want to acknowledge that I am a visitor to the lands and that I am on the Nanoose First Nation as well as the Qualicum Beach First Nation lands. And I acknowledge that, and especially today, as here on Vancouver Island, there has once again been found some unmarked graves within one of our First Nations groups in the Port Alberni area. Beyond that, I'm going to head into it. My hope is to get through the beginning part that I love quickly, because the part that's going to be most helpful for you in remote communities is going to appear at the end. So let's go. If there are any questions, as Dave said, please add them to the chat. Other than that, I would love, if you want to, just type in the chat if you have taken any suicide intervention training. So those things might be the Safe Talk with Livingworks, might be the ASSIST training, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills training. It may be something that you did otherwise, but it's just a curious question for me. I'm not going to, unfortunately, probably be able to watch it too much, but yeah, it helps me to know who's in the room, as well as the degree, even though it's going to be brief, how deep to go in this training. So here we go. Hope for remote communities. And well, that's fun. First off, the clicker doesn't work. There we go. So I do want to pause and recognize that anyone at taking suicide intervention training often has been impacted by suicide in one way or the other, be that friends and family members that have attempted or died by suicide, be that just their own thoughts, or be that far off acquaintances that have attempted or died by suicide. Often with media, individuals who have died impacted us as well. So I want to acknowledge that, and please be good to yourselves. There are resources available. Day is available for breakout. By all means, if you need to, we can arrange for you and I to talk as well. Tonight's plan, what I want to do, and the PowerPoint notes will be available for you after the training. So you may want to take notes. At the bottom of the screen in the very corner, you should see a slide number. So if you're writing notes, you may want to just add the slide number to that. We're going to really briefly look at trying to understand suicide in a very capsuled form. We want to go into an intervention of noticing, asking, listening, and responding. And as I said, what's really going to be key for those in attendance is how do you respond, particularly if you're in a remote and rural area. We'll take some extra time maybe for questions at the end, or not maybe, we will, and any of my closing remarks. Let's go. Understanding suicide. Suicide, typically, as much as we think suicide is about death, suicide is about people's desire to end their pain. And that pain can be physical, emotional, spiritual, or any other relational pain. Often suicide, I find, is about relational pain. It's about spirit sickness. I loved what one of the elders told me. He said, you know, we have to chase away that spirit of suicide, chase it out of our communities in a sense and out of our own lives. I also think about it being spirit sickness and just having our spirits broken. Day sent out just a wonderful resource in the newsletter that I'm not going to find because I forgot to put it right beside me, but it was another look at how the spirit is involved in suicide. Suicide, I often say, is about communication. I often say, you know, a 13-year-old girl, it's far easier for her to say to you, hey, I just want to kill myself, than to say, I'm being sexually molested. It's easier for a young man to say, I just wish I could die, than to say that I've been a victim of bullying. I think about a gentleman who phoned in on a crisis line that I was working, and you know, he really struggled with acknowledging his own thoughts of suicide because he was this, you know, macho man in a macho field, and he was actually being abused by someone. So it's about communication. I always think breathe. When somebody tells you they want to die, first thing you do is breathe in, relax, and breathe out. Very first thing. Usually not quite so noticeable, but relax. They're communicating with you. They're telling you a very interesting story, and they're inviting you in a roundabout way to engage with them and to support them. And suicide can be a coping strategy. There are some individuals that are in such traumatic situations that the only way that they can get through the abuse and the trauma that they're experiencing is to think or know that they can always end it by taking their own life. Suicide intervention. We're going to spend a bulk of our time on talking about this intervention. First thing we've got to notice, if we don't notice the individuals that are struggling with suicide, everything else kind of goes out of the window. We need to notice them. Once we've noticed them, we want to ask them directly about suicide. We need to know that that's what we're talking about, but then for them also to know that that's what we are talking about. After we've asked about suicide, we want to listen to their story of suicide. And some stories are very, very difficult, and some can be said easier than others. Some stories will take a long time to get out. But remember, they're telling you, they're inviting you into a very, very important aspect of their life. And so we want to listen, and listen compassionately. Once we've listened, we can't leave it there. We need to respond. And so, as I said about rural and remote communities, we want to make sure that we spend some time looking at how to respond. For those of you who live more urban, don't worry. A lot of the applications, in fact, all of the applications will be the same. It's just that when we start looking at resources, you have far more resources available than somebody in a very small community or a very remote community. So here's my question, and I do want you to add something to the chat right now, if you can think of it off the top of your head. When you think about suicide, and maybe you think of somebody you know that struggled with suicide, or somebody you've wondered, have they struggled with suicide? What was something that you either saw them doing that caused you to wonder, that you heard them saying that caused you to wonder, that you noticed in their mood, or something that you knew, an event that occurred in their life that caused you to wonder if they might be considering suicide? I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds, a minute.
Yeah, Amanda said dark humor and joking about dying.
Good. Yeah, Sean, save my voice if you don't mind reading them off as they come in.
Yeah, and Gabriel says withdrawal from normal activities. Oh, yeah, Day says that she knew he had lost someone else recently to suicide. Throwing out certain objects like pages from a journal, art, I guess probably stuff that would be important. Anna said that. And Arlene says words like, I don't want to go on, I don't want to live. Kate says a nihilistic outlook and comments like, what is the point? Andrew says, everyone would be better off without me. Yeah, and Arlene says, I wish I was never born. Marilise says, a child laying down lethargic on the ground for a long time in the middle of a play area. Derek says, heavy drinking.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And if anybody else is in the middle of typing, please send it in. Yep, substance use, I see that. I'm going to move on and say a lot of our comments, your typed comments, were about the comments, the things we hear people say. And I will say probably the easiest for me is when I can voice back to them the words that I've heard them say. That is probably the easiest when we do a suicide intervention. And those comments, what's the point? Sometimes they're super direct, like I want to die, I wish I was dead, wish I'd never been born. And some of them are a little bit more indirect when they say, what's the point? I'm just gonna, there we go. Their actions, somebody had commented on throwing away items. Interestingly enough, writing a will can be an indicator. Giving away items, especially prized items, can be an indicator. Again, not always, but it might be an indicator. Increased fighting, increased arguing. Actions might also get into the mood where we see them withdrawal, as someone had indicated. When we see what appears to be a down mood, when we see people crying, when we see people, just that really blank look on their face. I liked what was said about, a child laying in the middle of a playground. I must say I worked with a child who was probably 6. And the way we found out that she was thinking about suicide is that she stopped in the middle of the road. And it was a busy road in a downtown major area. And she just wasn't going to go on. Another action that was seen once, and again, this is with children, and I've worked a lot with children. However, I'll make sure I add some adult actions. But, you know, with a child, she was seen taking a knife. And if you watch me, she was just, you know, going like this. And an adult came and asked her what she was doing. And she said she was stabbing herself. With adults, you might see them if their plan is to hang themselves, you know, with a rope and tying knots. So there's lots of things and actions that we might see, as well as moods, and then events. Typically the event, and I do encourage those who are taking notes to write this down, typically the event that occurs that really triggers, or is like the straw that broke the camel's back, the event that occurs is loss related. So it might be a breakup of a relationship. It might be a loved one passing. It may be failing in school. It might be getting fired from a job. It might be getting charged with a criminal offense. It might be being sent to jail. So it's usually loss related. And then it can also be loss related in the area of losing faith in who I am, or losing, you know, this dream that I had to go into, I don't know, being a math teacher, which was something I wanted to be, you know, being a math teacher. And then for some reason, you know, if I didn't get accepted into university. So again, those kind of things. So remember the event. And usually it is an event that occurs that then reinforces these other feelings, and particularly this mood that they might have already been feeling. We want to ask, we need to ask clearly. When I ask somebody about suicide, and Day, if it's okay, I'll just practice with you. I know we've done this before. If I'm going to ask Day about suicide, I'm not going to say, Day, I have something to ask you, and you know, it's kind of hard. I hope you're not going to be offended. It's really hard for me to get the words out, but you're not thinking about killing yourself, are you? You know, and when I ask like that, I'm basically asking in a way that she's going to say no. I mean, why would she say yes to me? I'm not going to be very helpful. I'm not very relaxed in the topic. My anxiety is showing. So I want to ask in such a way as to say, you know, Day, we've been friends for a long, long time. And I noticed lately that you just seem not to be your chipper self. And I know that you just broke your leg, and I know that you love to ski, and that you're really disappointed about that. I'm just wondering, sometimes when people their moods change, they're not their same smiling self, and something occurs and they feel like they've, you know, lost an opportunity, like you have in training this year for the Olympics. Sometimes they will think about suicide. Day, I'm just wondering, are you thinking of killing yourself? So when I ask somebody about suicide, I want to ask them in a way that they understand why I'm asking. I want to let them know what I've seen. What have I noticed? What did I see Day do that caused me to wonder? What comments might she have made that causes me to wonder? Have I seen a change in her mood? Or do I see this persistent mood? And so moods particularly, and this is a little, I can't think of the word. That's okay, I'll pass it. Moods, remember that the mood might be anger, but it might also be depression. It might be high energy all over the place. It also might be low energy. And then I also want to say today, I know of this loss event. If you know it, great. If you don't, you can do this without. So I want to let Day know what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've, you know, felt, and what I know. Because then she knows a couple things. One, she knows that I'm paying attention to her. She also then knows why I'm asking. I'm then going to repeat it with a statement like this. Sometimes when other people have broken their legs, didn't get into the Olympics, are lower in mood, they think about suicide. I want to say this so that Day knows that she's not weird, that other people as well will consider suicide. And other people might consider suicide for the same reasons of what she is going through. After I said to them, sometimes when other people, they think about suicide, I'm just wondering if you're thinking about killing yourself. And there's a very specific reason why I use both the words suicide and killing yourself. If you are working with children, before I go on, I don't want to forget this. If you're working with children, the term you're going to ask them is, do you want to make yourself dead? So if you're working with children, I would do the same things, tell them what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've noticed, what I know. I'm going to say other times, other young people or other children, you know, who go through these same things, repeat it. They think about suicide. I'm just wondering if you want to make yourself dead. And the reason we're asking about suicide and killing yourselves is because if you're working with a developmental delay, if you're working with a person where English is a second language, if you're working with somebody who just doesn't even understand what the word suicide is, we're reinforcing it in a different way of wondering if you want to kill yourself. For most of you, you may find that word killing hard to say. I encourage you to just practice. And I also encourage you to practice this script. If we had more time, I was going to have you practice on your own, but I'm burning through the material so we can get to questions. And I'm just going to pause here. Sean, just on that section, is there any questions that came in on asking about suicide?
No questions on that. Yeah.
Okay, good. So here we go. Listening. This is my favorite analogy when I think to why is it that we want to listen? We want to listen because when we come across somebody, typically, let me see if I can go back in this. I can't. Typically, when we come across somebody, we're going to see them more like that. The lid's on, something's going on. It's not necessarily pleasant to look at. It's not necessarily pleasant for you to start the conversation. So these aren't always the funnest people to be around. And maybe you don't even want to start the conversation. So I acknowledge that it's difficult and it's tricky. Individuals who think about suicide, though, are thinking about things that are causing them a great distress. And I'm just going to keep playing this video as I go. Because what happens when somebody is struggling with suicide and their feelings are boiling over, when we take the lid off, it helps to take the pressure off and reduce the boiling over. Now, if you see this, and let me get to where I want to be. Okay, right there. In reality, on a suicide intervention, you're taking the lid off the boiling pot. You're not necessarily doing anything to turn down the heat so the pot stops boiling. Ideally, if you have time, you want to do what you can to turn down the heat. But the reason listening works is because people feel connected. They feel like you've noticed them. We want to take time when we do suicide interventions to actually listen to people. And why do we want to listen? Because in reality, talking helps to make their pain smaller. And the individual who's struggling with suicide needs somebody who's trustworthy and who will listen. It's interesting. I mean, when I think about it, when we go through a problem, and I was with a girlfriend recently because I was struggling with something, just being able to talk to her about it helped to make my own problem smaller. It helped to take the lid off the boiling pot. It helped me to understand and put into perspective what felt like it was consuming my life when in reality it wasn't. I was lucky enough that I had a friend, but sometimes it's a stranger that you will be supporting. They need somebody. They need to know you're trustworthy. Also need to know that you're capable and all those other things. And they're going to learn some of this by the fact that you're going to take the time to listen to them. What does listening do? Oh, sorry, what are we going to do when we listen? We want to listen for risk factors. We want to listen to understand why the person wants to die. I actually spend most of my time letting them tell me why they want to die. And sometimes I'll say, what's going on? What's tough right now? What's happening that you would rather be dead? And don't be afraid to acknowledge that that's where they're at. It's not linear like I'm presenting, but know that a lot of your time is going to be trying to understand and help them talk about what is going on that they want to die. Also, while they're talking about what's going on that they want to die, I keep my ear open for what's keeping them alive. True story, young lady graduating from high school had been bullied quite a bit. And I was called to meet with her because she had indicated that she wanted to die. Can't remember how. I met with her. She said, yep. When I asked her, yep, she did indeed. She planned on killing herself. I asked her when. She wanted to kill herself after graduation. And as I talked with her about graduation, I found out that she had a marvelous yellow grad dress that she wanted to wear. And so what was keeping her alive was the fact that she had this beautiful dress she wanted to wear. So even though she indeed wanted to die, and in her own mind, she had lots of reasons why she wanted to die, when I heard her say, well, she wasn't going to die till after graduation, I knew there was something about graduation that was keeping her going. And so investigate that. What's keeping that person alive? We want to listen enough so that within themselves, they can feel this own thing that I love to call ambivalence, where indeed there's a lot of them that wants to die, a whole big bunch of them that wants to die, but there's a piece that still wants to live. When I struggled with suicide and I thought about suicide, I was on a suicide journey for about 1.5 years before I actually made an attempt at suicide. And it took me a long time, you know, from that initial not even realizing I was thinking about suicide because I just wanted to die. I was hoping to get cancer. I was hoping, and not that cancer is a death diagnosis, but this was about more than 30 years ago, so probably more so then. But again, I was hoping to get some disease and die. I was hoping that I could walk across the street and get hit by a car. Now, if somebody had said, Judy, it sounds like you're thinking about suicide, I would have been shocked, but I would have quickly acknowledged or understood that, yeah, I want to die. I may not have called it suicide, but the individual could have done the same things with me that I'm guiding you through now. Very quickly after that, I realized that if I was going to die, I'd have to kill myself. And that whole process took, I don't know, let's say 3 months. I then spent 1 year just thinking more and more and more about suicide. And it wasn't so much thinking about suicide, it was thinking about the reasons why I wanted to die. There were things I knew that was keeping me alive, partly my faith, partly what would everybody else think, partly, well, I can get through this myself, I'm a smart woman, partly my kids, partly. But primarily, I was just thinking about those reasons I wanted to die. We want to talk to the individual enough so that they realize they have both reasons for living. We acknowledge they have reasons for dying, but we want to see that they have both the reasons for dying and reasons for living. We want to help them get to that place of ambivalence where, in a sense, we're drawing out more and more and more of the life. How do we do this, and why does listening work? when individuals are struggling with suicide, they primarily feel hopeless. They feel alone and they feel helpless. Just by having you listen empathetically, asking some good questions, using active listening, it increases their hope. It increases the hope. I'm thinking if Day's talking to me while I'm thinking about suicide, well, number one, the simple fact that Day is talking to me, I'm no longer alone. It's extremely as simple as that. The fact that Day is talking to me, I am no longer alone in that moment, in that conversation. The fact that Day is talking to me, it increases my hope that maybe something could be different. It also increases my hope that maybe Day or somebody she knows can provide me some help. And as soon as that becomes possible, then it decreases my sense of helplessness. I've just learned I can talk to Day. I can talk to people without being judged, without people telling me I'm crazy, without locking me up in the psych ward, which is the exact reason why I didn't reach out. I was petrified I'd be locked up in the psych ward. So just having a friend like Day, or a community leader, or a cultural worker, or my doctor, or a pastor, or a youth leader, or a childcare worker, or my boss, or an administrator, or an HR person, doesn't matter who, just them talking to me will increase my hope, decrease my sense of helplessness, and address my feelings of being alone, at least in those moments. We want to remember that suicide makes sense. I remember a young man that I spoke with, and I spoke with him for about an hour and a half before I could find out and understand his story. He started his story with, I have to die. I don't want to die. I have to die. I don't want to die. That went on in various fashions for about an hour until I could figure out why it is that he felt like he had to die. So I had to do a really good job of listening to his risk factors. Once I had listened to enough of his risk factors, he was ready to focus on the fact that he didn't want to die. And once he began doing that, and I gave him time to get there, then we could make a plan to keep him alive. So remember, even if you don't understand somebody's story, it makes sense to them. Suicide makes sense to them. If you heard the beginning of my story and my journey with suicide, it wouldn't make sense, but it made sense to me. It makes sense to the person. Remember, suicide makes sense to the person. Taking their own life makes sense. Killing themselves makes sense because they just want their pain to end. After we've listened, we need to respond. I see a hand raised. Sean, over to you. Is there a chat coming in? Or Anna, I don't know if I pronounced your name right. Did you want to say something?
Hi. Yeah, that worked so well. The raising your hand feature. Yeah, I was going to type this in the chat, but I felt like I couldn't do that and also listen to what you were saying. So, my question is on listening. Active listening is about engaging and not just like nodding your head. It's many things. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit from you if you have any advice on like non-judgmental ways to prompt further discussion. Because you mentioned in your first example when you were talking to that young girl about graduation, and how you like continued to learn more about it, and then you kind of got her reason for living. And I'm curious about that kind of question and answer portion that happened between finding out about graduation as her desired death date, and then finding out about her reason to live. Like, how do you ask questions in a non-judgmental way that allows a person to trust you during such a like fragile moment?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. That's a wonderful question. First off, my absolute favorite, when I don't know what to say, I simply say, tell me more. Tell me more. And the amazing thing is, in an intervention, I can probably say to the person, tell me more 4 or 5 times, not in a row, but throughout that 30-minute conversation. All right, when I'm just hearing the story, I'm not saying an intervention is 30 minutes. And we might have time to talk about timing, but I'm, saying, tell me more. In fact, right after you ask them about suicide, I'm not going to jump back to the screen, but right after you've mentioned to them what you've seen them doing, heard them saying, what the mood is, or what their loss that they've experienced, and then you indicate some other people, blah, blah, blah. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And if they say yes, my next phrase is, tell me more. I don't want to hound people with questions. So then what happened? Well, then what happened? Oh, well, why are you thinking that? And there's a judgmental statement right there. So I want to avoid all judgmental statements. If I wouldn't want it said to me at a point of crisis, then I try my best not to say it. So when possible, make statements. I will often, so that can't even pronounce it tonight, Rogerian thinking, counseling model of really repeating back what they're saying. And be careful with it. Don't be a parrot. Being a parrot is very, very annoying and you're going to get found out. But try and capsulize what it is they're saying. So right now I hear you're having a really rough time at school and there seems to be a lot of bullying going on. And then often I just do that. There seems to be a lot of bullying going on. And just my pause gives them space to open. The other thing I will say, especially when you ask them that first time about suicide or any other time, give them time to respond. I actually will count out, and I'll do it so you can see it, but I don't do it so they can see it. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 25, 1,000, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. I will count out silently to myself up to 30. So if I were to say, Day, I'm just going to do this very, very briefly, don't answer. Day, I'm just wondering, are you thinking of killing yourself? 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, and I'll stop. You get the idea. I'm going to count till 30. Why? I want to give Day time to think about my question. But more importantly, time to respond. So if you ask a question, give response time. In fact, if you're working with people that don't answer your questions, it may be that you're answering or asking too quickly, and then they learn. I don't have to answer because you're going to ask me a question, then you're going to ask me another question, and then you're going to ask me another question. I don't have to answer any of your questions, okay? And your responses need to be non-judgmental. Be curious. I think that's the best thing I can say, Anna. Be curious. Somebody's talking about why they want to kill themselves. Be curious. All right. Any other questions, Sean? Or anybody else want to put their hands up right now? Because this is actually the most important. I mean, what we're getting into now is important for you to know how to handle it. But the most important part is actually the listening. The first most important is to ask directly about suicide. And then the second most important is to listen. So any questions? Okay, I'm going to carry on. So I am going through this fast. But that's also so that we can wrap up by about 7 and then have a good half hour for question and answer. So please record any questions and we can get to them later. And remember, even though I very, very, very quickly have described asking about suicide and listening, please know that the bulk of your time when you're working with somebody who's considering suicide is going to be in that listening stage. Because once you do that, everything else is easy. If I've listened to somebody talk about suicide to the point that they now want to live, it's easy for me to work with them to keep them safe. If I've spent a lot of time talking to them and listening to them onto the reasons they want to die, and I just want to write me down something because I want to tell you something else there. If I spent lots of times listening to them as to why they want to die, they feel like I've understood them. They feel like they're not alone, and they're not necessarily going to tell me everything. But also, so I've spent so much time listening to them talk about why they want to die. I will also hear why they want to live. Just like the young lady who wanted to wait till after graduation. Okay, she wouldn't have realized, in a sense, really that. I had to help her to see that there was something that she wanted to live for. It was for her as simple as wearing that yellow dress. Then we started to do conversations and more work around self-esteem, around the value of her as a person despite what she had heard all her life. We worked towards giving her dreams and hopes for the future, encouragement. I really hope in the case of kids and in the case of our spouses or our partners or our best friends, that we can be their biggest cheerleader. But when they don't have a good cheerleader, we're going to come along and do what we can to cheer them on in whatever allowable or amount of time that we have. Some of you who will have very, very little time, if you're listening to strangers, acquaintances, meeting people on the airport, at the airport, on the plane. I have many, many interesting stories. That's another one of them we may get to. But yeah, just talking to people. So sometimes we have lots of times, and sometimes we're working to support clients or people that we serve, or we're supporting family member, in which case we will have lots of ongoing time to speak, and other times it's strangers. So one of the things I want you to do, and I'm going to go back to the listening. Let me see if I can go backwards. If you've got a piece of paper, I want you to take a piece of paper. I'm actually going to do it. Okay. I did mine too small. I'll do it bigger. Okay. Take a piece of paper and do that. All right. Divide your piece of paper into 4. Let me just do mine. Okay. So I don't know if you can see this. In the top, well, I'll ask you to do your own. In your top left-hand corner, write good dying. It's really what is good about dying, but all you need to do is write good dying. Top left-hand corner. Top right-hand corner, write bad dying. What is bad about dying? Bottom left-hand square, good living. GL for what is good about living. And then your bottom right-hand side, BL, bad living. What is bad about living? Okay, anybody got a question on that? Because the rest won't happen on if you have a question. Any questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, gone. All right. Now, when you start this conversation, after I've talked today, and she said, yes, she wants to kill herself. where I begin is not what's good about living. I've asked Day if she's thinking about suicide, and she says, yes, she wants to kill herself. And then I say, oh, Day, so what's good about living? She is going to tune me out. That statement alone has said, I'm not paying any attention to you, or I'm discrediting you, or I'm judging you, or I'm not comfortable with the topic. So I want to say, Day, I hear you want to kill yourself. Can you tell me what is good about dying? Okay, so you want to start with what is good about dying, your top left-hand side. You're probably going to have your most conversation in that quadrant. I tend not to take notes. If you do take notes, ask for permission. And one of the things that I find, if I need to take notes and I ask for permission and I just say, Day, is it okay with you if I take notes? Everything you say is important and I don't want to risk forgetting it. So I say to her, everything you're telling me is important. That's just given her value. That's just given her esteem. That just says to her, I care, without saying I care, or without saying, oh, I'm going to build up your self-esteem right now. Okay. So I'm going to say to her first, tell me, Day, what's good about dying? And after she's talked, I'm then going to go down to the bottom right-hand side. And I'm going to say, so Day, this question seems the same, but is there anything bad about living? So I've asked her first, what's good about dying? Then I'm asking her what's bad about living. I want to give her ample time to tell me why she's thinking about suicide without me saying, Day, why are you thinking about suicide? And if you say, why are you thinking about suicide? That's okay. Just make sure you don't say it judgmentally. Okay. And then if you realize, boy, that sounded bad, you just catch yourself and say, Day, I am so sorry. That sounded bad to my ears. I don't know if it did to yours. I really care. I'm wondering what is happening that's causing you to think about dying. Okay. After I've asked her what's bad about living, I don't want to go to what is good about living because she may not be on the living side yet. Okay, that ambivalence, she may still be looking over at death. So then I want to go to the top right-hand side and I say to her, tell me, what is bad about dying? And you may have to explain that because it kind of catches people off guard. And I'll say, okay, so let's just pretend you're dead. Then I would just say, what would be bad about that? Now, I try to leave it just like that, open-ended. If they don't understand, I might say, is there anybody you'd miss? If you were to kill yourself by the method that you just told me that you wanted to, who would find you? Are you okay with that? What do you think you would look like? If you die by hanging, do you know what your body's going to look like? If you die by an overdose, do you know what your body's going to look like? If you jump off that cliff. Okay, so what's bad about dying? Is there anybody that's going to miss you? Okay, you say there isn't. Is there anybody you're going to miss? You told me you've got a younger sister. You're not going to see her grow up. Is that okay? That's a really scary question. So I try not to ask questions because I don't want to come off judgmental. I might just say, you told me you had a younger sister. How would she be? So is there anything bad about dying? And then finally, and all of you who are life people who really wanted to get here, you're going to be so glad we're finally here. You're going to drop down to the bottom left-hand corner and say, is there anything good about living?
We do have one question, Judy.
Good. Fire
We
away.
have
Yeah.
Anna has her hand raised here.
Hi again. I love this style. And I'm curious about specifically the bad about dying section. Is there a way that you would recommend folks go about prompting questions about like, how do you feel about the person that would find you? Those things without framing that as like shame.
Mm. So I'm gonna say then, Anna, you must have. Did you hear shame in the way I asked?
No, I didn't. It was super neutral. And I was just curious if there was like a way, like if there's a method you're using or like some bit of information that you could provide that could help us, like, I don't know, and use that same style ourselves.
Just be curious. Because when we're curious, we're non-judgmental. You could even say, Anna, you could say, I'm just curious. Have you thought about who would find you? I'm just curious. Have you thought about what you would look like? I'm just curious. Have you thought about what it would feel like to die? Now, I would say if you're going to use that, I'm just curious, you're going to have to try some I think it's synonyms for curious, right? Because you can't keep saying, I'm just curious, I'm just curious, I'm just curious, because then it sounds forced and fake and all those other things. All right. What I will say, if you have taken enough time, if you have taken time, not rushed, you will find that when you say to the individual what is good about living, they will have things to say. If they don't, if Day says to me, Judy, there's nothing good about living, there's one of two things that has happened now. Either one, which is most likely, I have rushed it. Okay, that is the most likely thing. If I've spent good time and Day, and I say what is good about living and Day says nothing, the most likely cause is that I have rushed the conversation. So then I'm going to go back to, I would just simply say, Day, that's really, really interesting. You know, when I asked you about what is good about dying, maybe I missed something. Can you tell me again what's good about dying? So I go right back to number one. What's good about dying? Now, that's the one situation, and more likely than not, if it happens, it is because you've rushed. The second reason is because Day is committed to death. She is actually, there's one other. She's committed to dying. When somebody is committed to dying, their ability to find anything that's good about living is going to be next to zero. If Day were to say to me when I said, okay, Day, can you tell me what's good about living? And she says absolutely nothing. And I have indeed taken the time. So if you have time and you want to look at a time frame for this, I would say most suicide interventions will take me somewhere from an hour and a half plus. So if you've talked 15 minutes and she says there's nothing good about living, chances are you didn't take enough time. If I've really talked to Day for an hour by this point and she says nothing, chances are she's more committed to dying than I realize. Her death is imminent, number one, or number two, there is a mental health disorder and primarily bipolar, not bipolar. Oh no.
Borderline.
Thank you, Day. I missed the word. Yeah, primarily a borderline personality. And so that's a whole nother topic that unfortunately in this one session, we're going to just bypass. All right, I'm going to move on. How are we going to respond? Because at this point, if you stop the conversation, if I stop the conversation with Day, I've done a little bit. I've let her blow off some of the steam. I've taken the lid off the pot, But without me doing more, chances are the lid's going to get back on the pot really, really quickly. So when we respond, we in a sense need to have an idea of what are we doing and how are we doing it. And I was reluctant to put this in because I really don't have the time to give it justice. But at the same point, I think there is some basic information here that is helpful. This is really helpful for you. I just don't want you to think that with this, you know everything you need to know about suicide intervention, okay, with this chart. If somebody is just thinking about suicide, so I've talked today, I've asked her about suicide, I've gone through my chart, I actually have asked her, Day, do you know how you would kill yourself? And I actually like that better than do you have a plan? Because if I was a real snotty kid, I'd say a plan to do what, right? So I would say today, have you thought about how you would kill yourself? When I ask about that, and if Day said, yep, I'm just thinking, and sorry, let me do a check-in. Day, are you okay with all this?
Yes, thank you, Judy. I'm okay with this.
Okay. I know Day well enough, but all of a sudden I thought I really should check in again. Okay. So I'm going to ask Day, have you thought about how you might kill yourself? And Day says, yeah, I'm going to take some pills. So then I'm going to ask her a bunch of questions around that, like, you know, does she know what kind of pills? Has she collected them? How many does she have? How many does she think she will need to kill herself? How many does she have? How many does she think she will need to kill herself? You see, if Day thinks she needs 10 pills to kill herself and she's got 25, I am more concerned for her than if she thinks she needs 10 and she has 1. Now, unless you know medication, it's not going to be overly helpful to you unless you know what are lethal doses of everything. But this is more a guide because I'm trying to figure out her intent. So if Day says to me, no, Judy, I'm just really surprised. I've been thinking about suicide for a long time, but no, I've never really thought of how I'd kill myself. I think, Judy, I'm really kind of scared to die. All right. So if you're talking to somebody with only thoughts, you can be of low concern, not no concern, not 0, but of lower concern. And when it comes to deciding what to do, primarily with your support, with some coaching, it's going to be the individual will decide what to do. Okay, so on your notes, just say with coaching, the individual will decide what to do. You're going to support it. All right, but they're going to primarily figure out how to help themselves, how to intervene. And that's going to make more sense in a bit. If Day knows how she's going to kill herself and she has a date, she knows how she's going to kill herself, and she knows when she's going to kill herself. Or, and please note, this is an or if Day has tried to kill herself before, she is at moderate risk or moderate concern for suicide. So I'm more concerned about her. Now, if Day says to me she's got a plan and she's got a date, I'm not necessarily running her off to the hospital or radioing in for the chopper, depending upon where you live, right? But I am more concerned. And so in that, when it comes to making a plan to keep her safe, it's something that we're really going to do together. I'm going to let her let me know what it is she's going to do. But unless it is a significant plan to keep herself safe, I'm going to have to be a little bit more directive in making suggestions. If Day has a plan and a date, then I am necessarily going to be of high concern. In this case, I'm going to probably lead what we need to do to keep her safe, but it is going to be collaboratively. So I might be saying, you know, Day, you've told me you've got a plan to kill yourself, and I know what that is. And you've told me that you don't plan on seeing 2024. Now, as soon as she told me she's not planning on seeing 2024, I know that I possibly, not for sure, but I possibly have 10 months to support her. Or there's 10 months before she's going to kill herself. So yes, she has a plan. Yes, she has a date. Really significant, really concerning. I'm going to be more proactive in our action plan to keep her safe, but it is going to be collaborative. If Day or whoever were to have an immediate plan and date by which she's going to die, then I'm going to be accessing, it's what we call imminent risk, and I'm going to be accessing whatever emergency resources we have available to us. And you, sitting where you are, in whatever community you're in right now, I want you to start thinking, what are your emergency resources? Because I realize, and I don't know if anybody here is on the call from some of our most rural and remote communities, but I know communities that you couldn't get to a hospital in 4 hours if you drove, and some you would have to go by boat and then drive, and others you would have to be air backed out. So we're going to talk about what that would mean in your community. Moving on, just keep this in mind as a guide, because with the amount of training that you're getting in this hour and a half, this is helpful, but not overly helpful, okay? It does give you a framework though. In all cases, you want to develop a safety plan or a safe plan. Every single time I worked with somebody who's struggling with suicide, considering suicide, we do a safe plan. When I used to work as the child and youth suicide clinician, on the back of my business card had my safe plan, and it had about 5 or 6 lines. And so with every youth, I can tell you wonderful stories about this. We would do these on our very first visit. And so number 1, and you can write out your own ideally. Number 1, write down, what are 3 things you do that you enjoy? What do you do for relaxation? Just write my safe plan, number 1. 3 things I do to relax. Number 2, I want you to write out 2 to 3 friends that you could call. And if you want to pretend that you're a minor, then I want you to include, or if you are a minor, I want you to include a supportive adult. 3, where's a safe place for you to go? It might be your best friend's house. It might be the local 7-Eleven. It might be your community library. It might be a playground where you can just sit and watch others play. It might be a stream, because listening to the bubbling water really relaxes you, okay? It has to be a safe place though. So where is a safe place that you can go? 4, what are your cultural and or community supports that are available to you? Now, again, I wouldn't quite ask like that, but you know, are you a person of faith? Do you have a faith leader? Are you involved?
Judy,
Yes.
sorry to interject. Arlene has a question. What do you do if someone says, they have no friends or support?
Yep, I would just bypass it. I'd say, I'm really sorry to hear about that, but let's keep going. Let's see what we can sort out. Because I'm not going to argue with somebody, right? And the reason I put friends and supportive adults, and I bypassed even explaining this, is because when I worked with youth, what I really want here is a supportive adult. But if I were to try and argue with youth that they couldn't put their friends on this list, we would argue, and guess who would lose? Me. So I learned, you can put 2 to 3 people on it. I want one of those to be a supportive adult. Okay. If any of these bypass, if they're bypassing all of them, then you're going to go back in your estimation and realize you're working with somebody that's more significant in need or concern, and or you didn't take enough time listening. So try, don't push it. This should come, with maybe a little resistance, but typically not a lot. 4, what are your professional supports, or what are the professional supports available to you? That might be, when I think professional, I think those that are in paid positions. So somebody might say they want to put their community elder as a professional support, or they might want to put their community elder at number 4. To me, I'm not really of a concern there, but if they do have any counselors that they can see, if there's counseling programs within their community, they may want to put their doctor here, I think. Yeah, the next one is, what is your doctor or health clinic? And if I'm working, I ideally ask for people to write down their phone number there. I'm speeding us along. 7, what helplines and websites can they access? So there is a screen coming up that will give you some helplines and websites, but please work with them. And always, 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 when so far as possible, where you're at, and some communities are too remote for this, include a 1-800 24/7 crisis line of some sort. Yeah, okay. So in all cases, whether I'm low concern, moderate, high concern, or imminent concern, I'm working to develop a safe plan with them. Even if we've called an ambulance, while we wait for the ambulance, we're developing the safe plan. All right. So that's part of it. But there's other things that need to be done. In addition to doing the safe plan, we need to address any immediate safety concerns, and we need to disrupt the plan. So when I think about day, and I think about the wilderness first aid, and I think about, you're trekking some youth through the forest or some adults, you need to, once you find out that they are thinking about suicide, they do have a plan, and they're going to overdose with the pills they've carried, then you need to ask for those pills, or ask that they give those pills to someone else, another adult that's supportive. And ideally, I would like to see the handoff. Okay. If you're out hiking and they say they're going to jump from the next cliff, you're going to have a harder time about figuring out how you can keep them safe from that cliff. It may be, if you're the only guide that's out with them, you may want to bypass all cliffs. It may be that you're going to decide to turn around and take everybody back. It may be that there's multiple guides, and one person is going to stay by that individual. If you are in a remote community and their choice to die by suicide is by hanging, actually any community, I'm always going to ask for the rope. Now, I know there's many other things that they can hang themselves with, and it's really easy to find other things, but I want to break off any emotional attachment with a particular rope. Okay. If there's guns involved, if you feel comfortable, you could ask for the gun and the bullets. I do not feel comfortable with firearms. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to ask if there's somebody they can give them to, or I'm going to ask if they can put it down on the ground. Okay, so you always make sure you protect yourself. So we want to address any immediate concerns for safety, and we want to disrupt any suicide plans that they might have. We want to access supports. You can't do this on your own. I can't do this on my own. I've been doing this work for years. And without being arrogant, I'm actually very good at this work. And I don't say that arrogantly. It's just, I feel extremely comfortable and I know what I'm doing. Part of that comes from the fact that I am a suicide attempt survivor. It makes it really easy for me to do this work. Okay. Even with that said, I am still going to access additional support. Now, if it's my girlfriend, that additional support might be, in my case, it might be one of our pastors. In my case, that additional support might be a clinic at the hospital. In my case, that additional support might be going to the doctor together. If you're rural and remote and extremely so, then that additional support you're going to access, excuse me for a second. That's what happens when you talk for an hour and a half straight. That additional support that you're going to access may be one of your other colleagues in your office, maybe another family member, maybe, you know, the grandma in the community that everybody goes to and feels safe. It may be the individual's best friend's parent or best friend's sister. There's something about that connection when you access support via their best friend, not always their best friend, but a close relative of. You want to safe-proof the environment. So if you're in a community residence, group home type of thing, you want to make sure that the environment is safe. Chemicals are locked up. Herbicides, pesticides are locked up. Knives are locked up. Medicine cabinets are locked. So you want to safe-proof the environment. I've often worked with families to safe-proof their environment. So just to say to, you know, the spouse or the partner of the individual who's struggling, well, you need to safe-proof the environment. They're not going to know what you mean by that. So you're going to have to let them know. When possible, you want to address any self-harming behaviors or substance use to the best of your ability. I know that some of you will be working with individuals longer. Some of these are like one-offs, and some of these are done very remotely. You want to address those situations to the best of your abilities, and any others. If you can do anything to turn down the heat on the pot, please do that. All these things that I've talked about is taking the lid off the pot, helping the steam to come out, and helping, you know, to keep the lid off. But if you can do anything to actually turn down the heat, so if a wife is being abused, or sorry, a partner is being abused in a setting, if we can work to get that individual into a different safe setting, I'm going to do that. That's just one example. So anything that you can do, if you're working with youth and they're being bullied, what can you do to address the bullying in a safe manner? That will increase their sense of safety. And whoopsie, Sean, can you read? Oh no, I have it. Somebody read that bottom line to me because I can't see it.
It's revisit safe plan.
Thank you. See, if I followed my notes, that would help too. Yeah, so revisit the safe plan. I always, even when I worked with people for 6 months and a year, I'm always like, every time I saw them, I would say, any thoughts of suicide since we last met? And then, did you use your safe plan this week? Do we need to make any adjustments? Always revisit it, always adjust if needed. And always, 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 if you're the support individual for somebody who struggled with suicide in that more professional manner, ask them, each time you see them, unless you're seeing them every day, but if you're seeing them weekly or bi-weekly, ask them, any thoughts of suicide since I last saw you? I would do that with a friend. Hey, Day, it's been a month since we chatted. Any thoughts of suicide in the last month? She says yes or no. I trust her, and away we go. Okay. That is very, very quick. There we go. Questions?
Yeah, okay. So I've had a little bit of experience in this area, just because people I guess open up to me. I don't know. And I actually did struggle with suicidal ideation when I was younger. And so I always bring that up. Somebody comes to me with kind of like suicidal ideation themselves, just to demonstrate that I feel empathy for what they're feeling, and also to kind of like normalize the thoughts and whatnot, so they don't feel isolated or whatever. Would you recommend that, or would you say that that might be giving them almost permission, saying that it's okay to be thinking these thoughts, or to making these plans or whatever? Yeah.
Sean, that's a tough question. It's harder for me to answer, in that I don't want to discredit anything that you've done in the past or other people when we've used ourselves as an example. Ideally, I will never tell people I am a suicide attempt survivor when I'm working to support individuals. If I'm doing training, I do, because it just opens up training opportunities. It also helps me to normalize and acknowledge to those in the audience that, some of us have struggled with suicide. But when I am working with people one-on-one, I basically, I'm trying to think if I've ever told anybody. There was one young man who, after about 6 weeks of working together, he asked me, he says, Judy, he says, have you ever thought about suicide? And I just looked at him. He says, you just kind of get it. And I think, Sean, that's the thing. People are coming to you because you just kind of get it. And you don't need to tell them, well, I've attempted suicide as well, right? Because then it takes the focus off of them onto us. I don't want to do that. If somebody asks me directly, I would probably say, yes, I've struggled with suicide in the past. And so I'm wondering, can you tell me more about what it is that you just said? Or, yes, I've struggled about suicide in the past. When we were talking about your reasons for dying, I'm just, you mentioned that one of the things that you would miss is your cat. Who do you think would take care of your cat? So in other words, I'm acknowledging it, but in that same breath, turning it back to them. Okay. And again, I when I say that's difficult, because I don't want to say what you've done is wrong. I don't think what you've done is wrong. I think, Sean, what you can do in the future could be better, right? Because we don't want to take the focus onto ourselves. Also, I don't want them to feel like they need to take care of me. So if I don't need to share that about me, they get it. Like you said, you started off by saying, people come to me, I think you might have even said, I don't know why. And I thought, well, yeah, that's why, because they know you get it. Somehow they know that. So, other questions? And Sean, are you okay with that?
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, yeah, I guess I'm an empath. It's just weird that like people actually pick up on that. Like,
Yeah.
Judy, I'm just wondering if we could get you to not share your screen and we could just kind of see each other if we're doing more of a question and answer.
Oh, that would be lovely. So I'm going to hit stop share.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just say then, I'm just going to go through a couple things super quick.
Okay, sure.
Okay, there are some resources. Now, I said today that I will forward the slide deck to her and she could pass that on to you. But these are probably some of my favorites. Now, I just realized we have individuals from the States here, so I don't think, other than mantherapy.org, I think that is the only resource that's out of the States. Others of these are BC and or Canada, but you will have a list of that. I really encourage you to create your own list and carry it in your phone. So in my phone, I go to my contacts, I just tap crisis, and I have a whole list of resources coming up that I always have the phone number, because if the only number I know is a kid's help phone, well, that's no good for me if I'm supporting somebody who's a senior and transgender. Okay, so try to have resources available. For more information, there's the Canadian website. There's also the American Foundation. Here to Help is great for just general resources. Anxiety disorders has got some great information as well. And that is it. Stop share. Okay. Oh, this is much nicer. Now I get to look at other people. Questions, comments?
This is wonderful. And I just want to acknowledge that we're more than happy to hang out and have a nice question and answer period. I also know that some people were planning to be here until 7 and you have something compelling that's going to pull you away right at 7. So I just want to honor that and thank you for being here. I will send out the slide deck. We do have US resources listed on our website, or there's a nice link to where you can look up resources by state. So that can hopefully fill in that gap. And maybe just before because I know what happens sometimes at the end of these wonderful Zoom calls is sometimes people start to trail off and it's a little bit anticlimactic by the time you really do kind of wrap things up. There's only a couple of people left. So I just want to kind of formally thank you, Judy, for being here so much and for sharing some of your expertise and knowledge. And it's such an honor to have you here, especially after all that we've done working together. And I also want to honor and thank every one of you for being here as well for this important topic. And also we want to say that, there are resources available on the website, and we're also, happy to receive emails from you folks. If you have something that you've been thinking about or that's on your mind, or you'd like support trying to connect with somewhere, then we also want to help support you as well. So, and I'd love to invite everyone just to take a big stretch up before we kind of get more into a Q&A.
Hey, and I think we're going to send the slides out to everybody who's here, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Judy's going to send them to me, and
that's
I
in
will
response to Arlene's question in the chat.
Oh, yes, for sure. And maybe we'll just do, before we go into a nice Q&A, just shake your hands out for a sec. Take a deep breath. And I really like to just do a nice tap all the way down my arms. Yeah. And underneath my arms. And big breath and right into the armpit. The armpit's actually a really good place to put a little bit of pressure for a moment.
Yeah, but mine are sweaty.
Yeah, you've been working hard, Judy. Okay, and one more time on your other arm, balance out those sides of your body and your nice body brain system. And again, a little bit of pressure in that armpit there. Seems a little bit silly, but this is a really nice way to help your nervous system kind of discharge. We've been chatting about some big things. So thank you so much. So Judy, I'll turn it back over to you. And any questions, comments from anyone? We can spend a little bit of time chatting.
Well, and first off, my apologies. I have been watching my time to make sure that I was done talking by 7. And obviously I forgot I should have been done at about 6:30, giving us that good half hour for Q&A. So that's my apologies. And please, if anybody does need to leave or you want to leave, that is absolutely fine. So if not, I will ask if anyone has questions. If everybody wants to leave, we can wrap right now. I don't know, Day, how do you do this? Because it's my mistake. I should have stopped earlier for this Q&A.
That's okay. We got the benefit of hearing from you for a little bit longer. And there were questions along the way too. So normally we do have kind of a formal invitation to leave at 7, and then we hang out for, 10, 15 more minutes or whatever people would like to stick around and ask some more questions, then we can definitely do that. So yeah, this is that spillover time.
Good. All right. I'm curious, if nobody has a question, I'm curious whose work, yeah, go ahead, Kate.
I obviously know that the presentation time and format is short, and therefore we're talking a bit more of what's more common in general rather than exceptions, but a few exceptions you brought up in terms of method and approach were around children specifically. And I know Anna's, one of her questions was around, the what's bad about dying format. And to that in particular, I felt that would be challenging to navigate with children or maybe some other vulnerable populations. So if you can for a moment speak to some like notable exceptions to some of the strategies and methods that you've spoken about in like the listening aspect of intervention.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. So, I think of a few things because, my brain categorizes or remembers things by children, but the same would apply. What we're going to talk about now would apply to somebody who's developmentally delayed with a mental age of, so when I'm going to say like 10 and under, 11 and under, would also apply to someone whose English is second language. Because what I say, when I say killing and when I say suicide, I'm not sure what that means for the individual. So if somebody says to me, well, I just want to off myself, okay, I'm going to say in return, I hear that you want to off yourself. Could you tell me what that means? Or if I'm fairly sure based on the conversation, I might say, I hear that you want to off yourself. Oftentimes in my past, that means that people want to kill themselves. What does offing yourself mean for you? So match language when possible. So that's maybe one of the things, and especially if you're working cross-culturally, that's important. With children, though, the surprising thing is when I say, do you want to make yourself dead? They get it. And they actually don't have a hard time with it. When I went to work as a child and youth suicide clinician in Vancouver, I believe it was 6 of my first 8 clients were 8 and under. So I had a 4, 5, 2 6s, I think a 7 and an 8-year-old. And that was right away. And they get it. And I think also maybe with them, if you've got a play therapy background, that would be helpful. I don't have that. I do maybe invite them to draw pictures and tell me about the picture. If they want to, play dolls, and I'll have them tell me about that. I'm not sure if I can think anything else without maybe more direct questions. Kate, I'm going to give you, do you have a question? And if not, no, okay. I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but is it Rodolfo?
Yeah, if you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah. You can call me Rudy.
Okay.
A lot easier. Yeah, the question I have is actually regarding if you don't really know someone very well, you don't understand if that's their type of humor. So I'm curious, like, how many red flags would you need to have in order to have like an intervention with someone? Maybe you do know them somewhat well, but like this is like an issue with me usually.
Yeah, that reminds me of, remember I was telling you right at the beginning about this macho man who worked in a macho field, and he called, and so he called a crisis line where I was working, and we started, I have never had so much fun on a crisis call, right? like for some reason, it was probably him, humorous. We were joking around right away. Obviously he was, I followed. And because I'm going to, again, match where he is at, right? But in that, we had a great time and lots of laughs. And so eventually I said to him, and boy, did I see, I've learned my lesson. You make enough mistakes and you learn lessons. Learned my lesson on this one. So eventually I said to him, well, I'll just make up the name Jay. I said, Jay, so, we've been chatting for a while. You've called a crisis line. What is it you'd like to talk about? And in that same fun voice, he says, well, I'm getting beat up by my wife. And the way he said it, he probably said, well, I'm getting beat up by my pipsqueak wife. So in other words, small, petite, little, right? And then he laughed. So I laughed. And I said, okay, yeah, I get it, but that's funny, but why are you calling? And then there was a sudden change in his voice. He says, no, Judy, I'm serious. I am so embarrassed. And that was when he said, I work in a macho field, his words, and I'm not going to share the field, but if I did, you would go, yeah, it is typically a very macho field that he worked in. And he was he described himself as a very, well-built, strong individual. And so it was particularly embarrassing for him that he was getting beat up by his petite partner. So since that point, I have decided that I would never joke around when it comes to suicide. So if somebody jokingly, and I've had this happen, jokingly say, I said to one gentleman, I was riding the ferry. I live on Vancouver Island. I was heading over to the mainland and I have to ride a ferry. And so I was at one of the services. I think I was in the little store on the ferry, buying a chocolate bar, whatever. And so I said to the gentleman who was working, I said, so how are you doing? He says, well, my day's so bad, I think I'll just kill myself. And I thought, the likelihood is low, but I don't know. And I said, sir, I heard you just say that you're having a bad day and that you're thinking, you said that you'd like to kill yourself. I'm just wondering, are you thinking about suicide? And right away, he knew that I was ready to talk to him. And he said, well, no, I was just joking. And in that case, it's interesting. In that case, in that moment, the setting, other people soon to come in line, I let it go. I think if it was somebody I know, I might have let it go in the moment and then gone back to him later. So now whenever anybody jokes about suicide, I very quickly do a check-in. And I'm not joking when I'm doing my check-in, just because I'm concerned about them and I want them to know that. So Rudy, I don't know if that helps or if you have any other, you want to fill that question out a little bit more.
That's very helpful. Definitely if they're in your world and you see them every so often, you'll come back to them. I think that's something I want to do. So that's cool. If it's someone, it's very good because you have to make it serious. And during the Livingworks, that was something they emphasized was it's a serious topic. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, Dave?
Yeah, actually, Judy, I have a question that comes up all the time. We talk about it sometimes in class, but I'm curious your perspective on it. If you ask someone, like kind of like the scenario that you just said, but let's say it was someone you had an opportunity to follow up with. If you ask someone a direct question about, are you thinking about suicide? And they say, no, but you suspect that maybe there's more to it, right? Maybe they really are, but they are not open to talking to you at that time or whatever, right? what are your kind of thoughts around, is it still impactful to ask, or what's the impact of asking anyway? What's the potential impact to them going forward? And how would you decide how or whether to follow up on that?
Yeah. Good question. If I understood correctly, you've already asked them and they've said no, right? So there are times, basically, if I ask somebody about suicide and they say no, and in my sense, I'm confident that they're not, despite what they've said, and I've chatted with them for a little bit, but I really feel like, no, this was just a statement made, et cetera, et cetera. I will let it go. That said, I will stay in conversation with them, because chances are somehow from the things that I noticed, remember, that I saw, that I heard, that I sensed, that I knew, I can generate a conversation. And so I might say, hey, I asked you about suicide. You said no. I did notice though the other day that you were pretty angry, and you did indicate, you're pretty mad and you were going to do something about it. Let's talk more about that. So in other words, I would take them back to what I saw, what I heard, what I felt, or what I knew, and try and continue that conversation. Now, let's say we go back there and I find out that, yeah, he was bummed out because he just got fired. That gives me things to talk about. So I would pursue that a little bit more in conversation. If more and more of what was being said had me think that, hey, I think this person is at risk of suicide, I would ask again. And I would just say, hey, I know I asked you before and we've been talking for a while now, and you've talked more about what the impact of this, being fired from work is going to mean to you and your family. And you also said that you were working hard and trying to get overtime in so that you could, I don't know, make a trip out west to see your mom who's passing. I'm just wondering, and you sound very, very down about that. And so with that, and maybe with these other couple things, it's just causing me to wonder. I'm going to ask you again. So, in all of that, are you thinking, have there been any thoughts about wanting to be dead? So I may in that change the word from suicide and killing to wanting to be dead. And there's a whole difference between wanting to be dead and then acting on it with suicide. So if they say no thoughts, again, then I'm going to try and be supportive. Do the same things. I'm going to listen. I'm going to have a conversation, and then I'm probably going to do a safe plan with them anyhow. However, if they say no and I can just tell there's something wrong, I might just say, I've asked you and you said no, and I can still get this sense there's something bothering you. It seems like maybe I'm not the best person or the person that you'd like to talk to. Is there somebody else that I can get for you to talk with? Because it may be that that's my cousin, and my cousin doesn't want me to know, right? Or maybe it's my best friend. Or maybe I thought they were my best friend and they're really not, and they're going to dump me. No, who knows, right? Maybe this face reminds them of their grandmother and they just can't imagine telling their grandmother this. I don't know. Just like we don't know what is it that people end up sharing their most personal information with us. I always think of it as a gift, and I accept it as a gift. And it's a gift to help me, to help them keep themselves alive. So they may want to talk to me, they may not. If indeed I believe them, that's how I support. And if I don't, then I'm going to pursue a little bit more by the ways I've just explained. Did that cover the question, Day?
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Judy. I appreciate that, like, attempt to, or offering to follow up with additional conversation, and then also offering to connect with someone else, right? And I love what I've seen in the chat a little bit earlier. I think Anna was commenting about connection, and I think Judy, you and I have both been able to work with Jane Middleton Moss a little bit, and I love her emphasis on connection. Connection is the correction. So always coming back to that. I'd like to, I think we're at a point where I'm going to invite us to wrap up. Judy, if folks are interested in being in touch with you in the future, I know you do a lot of consultation work and that kind of thing, then folks already have your email,
Yeah.
right? We've been CCing you in all of the correspondence already, and I will also send out the slide deck that you send us. And I'll also send out the link to the Livingworks Assist training and the Livingworks Start training, because those are two great trainings. I know some of you have taken them, Rudy's taken them. I think there's 1 or 2 other people that have taken them. So there's lots of kind of continuation or invitation to continue this skill set. It's a really powerful skill set to continue to work on for our whole lives. Any last words, Judy?
I just want to say thank you. At the very end of my slide deck, it will say something like, thank you for being involved in suicide intervention. Thank you for the gift of, taking this training, taking this interest in suicide, and now taking it back to your community. Like the gift that you give to your friends, your families, your circle of influence is just commendable. And one of the things I love doing more than anything else is building suicide intervention safety across, the networks of other people. So thank you. And I just wish you all the best. By all means, if you do want to email me, please go ahead. Please indicate though that you were in this training. So I'll be able to connect together who it is. Not so much who it is, but the information that you have already.
Yes.
But thank you. All the best, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.